With development teams at Square Enix busy working away on the next part of the Final Fantasy VII Remake, as well as Final Fantasy XVI, it felt like there was already quite a lot on the horizon. But according to a new rumour, which comes from a very credible source, there could also be a third major Final Fantasy game in development exclusively for the PlayStation 5. It could also be getting revealed within the next few weeks, and at the end of the video, we're going to discuss potential options for what the game might be. Now, the rumours come from a user on Reset Era called Navtra, who over the past year has been quite prolific when it comes to leaking what Square Enix are planning to do. They revealed almost the entire lineup of the PlayStation 5 showcase that aired in June last year, which of course included Project Athia, and they also revealed that the Avengers game would have exclusive DLC on the PlayStation, which ended up being Spider-Man. The only prediction that was wrong at the time was the reveal of Final Fantasy XVI during the showcase, but that turned out to also be true, as the announcement had just been delayed until later in the year, and Navtra even preempted that delayed announcement by stating that when it was revealed, Final Fantasy XVI would be a PlayStation 5 exclusive. In January of this year, Navtra then leaked that Square Enix would reveal Endwalker the following month, something that happened like clockwork. They also revealed that Square Enix were working on a PlayStation 5 version of the Final Fantasy VII Remake, which then appeared during the February State of Play broadcast, and that Life is Strange 3 was in development, which was then revealed as Life is Strange True Colors during a special Square Enix showcase in March. Needless to say, when Navtra leaks something, there is often legitimacy. And in relation to this new rumour, Navtra has stated that fans should expect at least one more major Final Fantasy announcement from Square throughout June, in addition to updates on Final Fantasy XVI, the Final Fantasy VII Remake, and Endwalker, and that the announcement will be quite significant. They noted that the revealed game won't be as big in scale as, say, Final Fantasy XVI or Forspoken, but it will be more impactful than, say, a new World of Final Fantasy or another remaster. If true, it could mean that Square Enix are attempting to revert back to a previous mindset. In the past, the Final Fantasy brand was often used to explore the creation of Gaiden experiences, and prominent examples would be the original iterations of what ended up becoming the Mana and Saga franchises, as well as Tactics, Crystal Chronicles, and more recently, the Bravely series, which started out as Final Fantasy IV Heroes of Light. That's very different from how the Final Fantasy franchise has largely been used within the past 10 years. Sporadic main series releases have been surrounded by plenty of remasters of old games and copious amounts of mobile titles, with the only games to release outside of these three categories being Theatrhythm, Final Fantasy Explorers, Dissidia Arcade, and then NT, and World of Final Fantasy. And even within those games, most of them were intended as tributes, leveraging nostalgia as opposed to creating something inherently new. If the ambition within Square Enix is now to create more unique expansion to the Final Fantasy brand, then that can only be seen as a rather exciting prospect, and it could help to explain why the company has predicted significant growth over the next 3 years. In their recent earnings report, Square Enix forecasted their medium-term earnings target as 400 to 500 billion yen, with an operating income between 60 and 75 billion yen. For reference, compared to where Square Enix are now in terms of performance, that represents at least a 20 to 50% growth in sales and a 30 to 60% increase in operating income. That's a significant hike up in comparison to how Square Enix have been performing over the past 4 to 5 years financially, and it would be almost double what was seen as a typical year between 2015 and 2019. To achieve this growth, Square Enix has laid out a 3-step plan. 1. Strengthen their IP ecosystem. 2. Take on new domains. And 3. Optimize their business structure. If we then take a deeper look at the digital entertainment segment, then the first objective aligns very well. Within the HD games sub-segment, their main ambition is to strengthen existing IP and leverage them in multifaceted ways. They also want to create new IP and stressed their ambition to keep targeting multiple major title launches per year. In theory, this all promises to be quite exciting, as the pipeline we already know includes a ton of games. Forspoken, Babylon's Fall, Final Fantasy XVI, Project Triangle Strategy, Part 2 of the Final Fantasy VII Remake, and Life is Strange True Colors. And what's crazy is that each of these games should be releasing within the next 3 years. It's also heavily rumoured that Dragon Quest XII will be added to the mix at the upcoming 35th anniversary stream, and People Can Fly, who worked on Outriders, revealed back in 2020 that they are working with Square Enix on another AAA game that is planned to release before the end of 2024. That's already 8 big games planned to release within a short space of time, and if the rumour is true, and Square Enix are going to announce a brand new PlayStation 5 exclusive Final Fantasy game alongside a brand new cross-platform game from Eidos, then there are exciting times ahead. The next question then becomes though, well, what could the game be? And that's where we get to have some fun with speculation. It's unlikely to be Final Fantasy XVII or anything of that magnitude, but there are a few sub-franchises that could be revitalised, and perhaps the one that would receive the most fanfare would be Tactics. Final Fantasy Tactics was released all the way back in 1997, right after Final Fantasy VII, and it did so as the first major spin-off to the Final Fantasy franchise since the fabled Mystic Quest. It has since gained a cult following and even spawned its own sub-franchise that started on the Game Boy Advance and continued onto the DS with Final Fantasy Tactics A2, with another sub-franchise called Crystal Defenders then following. It's seen Tactics go down the proverbial garden path, with the most recent iteration being Final Fantasy Tactics S, which was released as a Japanese exclusive mobile game back in 2013. But fans have been clamouring for a proper tactics game to follow up that initial release for a considerable amount of time, and even though War of the Lions scratched the itch when it released 10 years ago and has continued to do so after being ported to mobile devices, something more significant would be welcome. Yasumi Matsuno was the original director, and he also produced Final Fantasy Tactics Advance before leaving Square Enix midway through the development of Final Fantasy XII, but he has since returned to work on the re-releases of Tactics Ogre and War of the Lions, and has, in more recent times, worked with Yoshida to create Ivalice content for Final Fantasy XIV. Based on how well that content was received, it has created a heightened level of interest around Tactics, and it feels like it would be silly for Square Enix not to try and capitalise, especially as they're doing the same thing right now with Nier Replicant, which has received interest from both the performance of Nier Automata and the raids that were produced for Final Fantasy XIV. Square Enix also released War of the Visions at the end of 2019, and that has been a huge success, replacing Brave Exvius in Japan as the highest grossing Final Fantasy mobile game. For reference, it's even been the 7th highest grossing mobile game in Japan so far this year. And then there's Hiroyuki Ito, who worked alongside Matsuno to create Tactics before helping to oversee 12 after Matsuno departed. He has been noticeably quiet for the past 5 to 10 years, with nothing but rumours swirling around about what he might be up to, and we'd like to hope he's up to something important. Another potential game that could be a curious proposition would be something akin to Final Fantasy Warriors. Outside of producing and expanding Dynasty Warriors, Samurai Warriors and Warriors Orochi, Omega Force have been able to successfully work on merging the Warriors style of gameplay with other IPs. It started with Gundam, but has since expanded to Fist of the North Star, One Piece, Zelda, Dragon Quest, Arslan, Berserk, Fire Emblem, and now Persona, and it's got to the point that these games have started to become self-sustaining and become franchises on their own, with One Piece now in its 4th iteration, and there being multiple Gundam, Fist of the North Star, Dragon Quest, and Zelda games. Historically, many of them would have been classified as guilty pleasures, but 2 of the most recent crossover games, Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity and Persona 5 Strikers, broke the mold somewhat by receiving a high degree of critical praise and selling well, with the former selling 1.3 million copies and the latter selling 3.7 million. Final Fantasy, with its expansive lore, unique worlds, devilish enemies and iconic characters, feels very well suited to being adapted to such a genre, and with Square Enix already having a solid relationship thanks to the production of 2 Dragon Quest Heroes games and Omega Force also developing Dragon Quest Builders 2, it's actually a little baffling that they have not thus far chosen to explore creating such a game. But who knows, perhaps the success of Persona 5 Strikers and the recent Hyrule Warriors has changed their minds, and Final Fantasy Warriors is secretly in the works already. After all, Omega Force has been pretty tight-lipped about their next project outside of Samurai Warriors 5 and Dynasty Warriors 9 Empires. There have also been rumours that Square Enix may choose to revive the Chocobo franchise. Prior to the release of Chocobo's Mystery Dungeon Everybody, which released in 2009 as a remaster of Final Fantasy Fable's Chocobo's Dungeon, the 2 most recent Chocobo games released were Chocobo's Chocota Farm, a mobile game that was exclusive to Japan, and a Facebook app called Chocobo's Crystal Tower, which had a worldwide release in 2010. Needless to say, it's been a while, And as the Chocobo sub-franchise has numerous facets, with there being story-driven adventure games, dungeon crawlers, and racing games, there are plenty of options. But there's one genre that is of particular interest: the racing games. Chocobo Racing released on the PlayStation back in 1999, as Square looked to take advantage of the kart racing craze that had been created by Mario Kart and built upon by games like Street Racer and Diddy Kong Racing. They attempted to revive Chocobo Racing back in 2010 with the announcement of Chocobo Racing 3D for the Nintendo 3DS, but it was cancelled a few years later for unknown reasons. But since then, kart racing games have seen something of a resurgence, and the past 4 years have been quite insane. Mario Kart continues to sell ridiculous amounts of copies, with Mario Kart 8 Deluxe now having sold almost 36 million copies on the Switch, and the newest iteration, Mario Kart Live, already selling 1.3 million copies. Team Sonic Racing arrived as the latest iteration of that revitalized kart racing franchise. Crash Team Racing has been remastered, there have been 2 Nickelodeon kart racing games released, and there's even a Hot Wheels game coming out soon. It feels logical that Square Enix would try to capitalize on this, and there was fuel thrown on the fire as earlier this year, Square Enix were granted trademarks for properties called Chocobo GP and Chocobo Grand Prix in multiple Western territories after registering the same trademarks in Japan at the end of last year. They also registered some other trademarks earlier this year, which ended up being announced as games, so there's a good chance that something is in the works. Whether it is a game remains to be seen, but it's still rather curious. Then again, what Square Enix are rumoured to be revealing could be something completely unrelated. Perhaps they could be looking to push the Final Fantasy franchise in a new but complementary direction so that they can create something that has a lasting legacy, much like they did with Tactics back in the day. Either way, be sure to let us know in the comments how you feel about this rumour and what you hope the game might be, and if you enjoyed the video, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Alright guys, this is Daryl signing out. I'd like to extend a big thank you to all of our Patreon and YouTube membership supporters, especially Raining Eckham, Logan Nijay, Benjamin Snow and Gregory, who are super special Onion Knight supporters, and of course, a big thank you to everyone for watching this video. I'll see you all again soon for more Final Fantasy goodness.